computer and share the screen. And for those at home that weren't here in class for this, ran into a real issue. In fact, that a lot of basic knowledge that has to do with the ancient world and the classical world, upon which our society is built, by the way, is just not something that a lot of students know about. And unfortunately, so there was a gap somewhere, and we're going to have to fill that gap. And so you're going to get a crash course here in ancient history, okay? And some definitions that are fundamental, and you just need to know them, period, okay? All right, now, yesterday too, I gave you a periodization. And this is when I realized, oh my gosh, they don't know this. And so as we started in first hour today, I realized the depth of it. And so we're going to have to drop back to the ancient world. Now, here's the thing. There's a whole lot of people that lived before the ancient world, right? The ancestral homeland of Homo sapiens. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of years here. We're not going to deal with that. That's anthropology, archaeology. Those are things that we don't deal with, right? What is the beginning of history? What does it mean to have history? What do you need as a prerequisite for history? Take it.
Like written.
Say it again.
Written history.
That's exactly right. First class, get it right immediately. You have to have written history. So everything before the invention of writing is prehistoric. Right. Okay. So our field of history is kind of limited. Archaeology, anthropology, other kinds of things look deeper into the past than we do. But we take that information and kind of learn from it, because the truth is we have got to deal with a concept called civilization. Civilization, one of the elements of civilization is writing, right? And so we got to pretty much figure out what civilization is and what it isn't. Okay, and we're going to do that right now. All right, I don't have time for a lot of questions.
Could records and writing be the same thing?
Yeah, as long as it's in written form. Yeah, that's kind of when things start. Yes, absolutely. But you can also supplement that like with artifacts, images, pictures, paintings on the wall, all that kind of stuff. So we borrow from anthropology a lot to back up the written history. But if you don't have somebody writing history down, or at least leaving a written record, let's put it that way, then you don't have that. So the ancient world, right, roughly goes between 3,500 BCE to about 500 BCE. All right, now, in this ancient world, we know that before this happened, before the ancient world became the ancient world, there were other ages. You guys know the Paleolithic era, right? The Old Stone Age. You guys know how that turned out. You know about the Shavat caves, you know, 30,000 years old, these diagrams on the cave in this cave in France. People lived in family groups, kinship groups, clan groups, maybe tribes. They had their ceremonies, they had their way of living, they lived happy lives. And the lucky ones lived in an area where they didn't have to wander for their food. Most people early on lived as hunting, gathering peoples. I mean, you kind of take a look at this map and see that people were on the move, looking for new places to live and whatever. One group found their way down here to New Guinea. And when you get to New Guinea, oh my goodness, it's magic when it comes to producing food, right? Literally food everywhere and lots of it. And so these tribal groups all then settled in this area. And here's a picture right there. That was taken like 2 years ago. So there are still people living the ancient Aboriginal lifestyle pre-civilization. Here's a group of warriors taken again about 2 years ago, this picture. And they're preparing for a little shootout with a neighboring tribe. Maybe they're fighting over a little bit of turf. Maybe somebody insulted somebody. Warfare in these days wasn't very warlike. A lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. Somebody shoots an arrow. One guy gets hit. Ouch. Okay, that's it. War's over. But the point is made. Our turf, your turf, right? And this thing called civilization starts to encroach on the natural world and on the Aboriginal world, right? Because at its core, what civilization is the invention of agriculture. Now, what's the term that kicks all this off? What is the term for the invention of agriculture? What do we call it? This is when my heart stops and I go, really?
The Neolithic Revolution.
Raise your hand if you know what we're talking about. Perfect. Got 5 or 6 hands. The Neolithic Revolution. Neo meaning new, lithic meaning Stone Age. The Neolithic Revolution, the Stone Age revolution, where they learned how to plant crops and to grow food rather than just go find it. Look, at this time, we have lots of different lifestyles. We have, for example, migratory peoples, right? There's 2 kinds. Those that are purely hunting and gathering. So they're going to go wherever they can to find food in the summer, find food in the winter. They're going to do a lot of hunting, that kind of thing. And then they also domesticate animals. All this happened in prehistoric times. All this happened during the Neolithic era, where they domesticate animals like sheep and, goats and cows and yaks and camels and all that stuff, chickens. And the point is, they would create herds. Now, these herds had to be moved because they'd eat all the pasture in one area. So they had to be moved around a lot. This is the basis of the whole Mongolian civilization. They had these huge groups of horses, right, that they would pasture in different places, and they'd have to move around. So they lived in tents still, basically. But then, because of this invention of agriculture, this Neolithic revolution, there were some people that were able to actually grow their food enough to live in one spot. These become sedentary people, and so little villages spring up. These are not civilized people yet. This is not civilization. This is small scale agriculture for small groups. And by the way, this right here, this is another modern picture, northern Iran. Large herd of sheep here being moved by these boys and their families. And this still continues to this day. Here's an animal that they domesticated. Became very important for herdsmen, and that is the dog. Right. And here in Utah, well, here, look at this guy with his dogs. I love that picture from the steppes of Iran. This is actually a picture from the United States. Here, what we have are 2 Basques from Spain, basically, who come over because they're great with sheep and were hired to migrate the sheep up and down through pastures. I run into this every year, twice a year. I go down my favorite riding trail. All of a sudden, boom, a wall of sheep. Hundreds of sheep are being herded up into the mountains, right, for the summer, and they're going to bring them back down, load them into trucks, and take them to a different pasture for the winter. And one guy's doing it, and he's a Basque. I mean, he's descendant of this group of people. He's speaking his version of Spanish all the way through, with 5 dogs, managing 500 sheep and moving them so fast it just made your head snap. This whole trail is suddenly full of sheep, and within literally 5 minutes, they're all over the next hill into the area where they're going to pasture them for the summer. People still live this way, right? And yeah, I mean, there's still pockets in North America now where the Native Americans who were hunting and gathering, and in the East Coast especially, where sedentary small Neolithic villages were springing up, they literally got crushed by civilization. Large-scale agriculture moved in and stole their homes from them. This prehistory part, also we get things like metallurgy, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, all of that you should have learned about. But again, we're still in kinship groups of families, clans, and tribes. They had their own ceremonies, their own religion, their own gods, all that kind of stuff, and lived happily for a long, long time. But this is not civilized yet. What civilization is, basically, is large-scale application of agriculture, where you take growing crops from a small little hamlet in the middle of the mountains somewhere with just you and your family and a few friends, and you blow it out and create what we call a surplus of food that is unprecedented in human history. How unprecedented? Take a look at that population graph. Right down here at the bottom, you got prehistory, 4 million years ago. Watch the population of the earth barely crawl upward as we create civilization and create this massive surplus of food. Now look at it today. Modern farming techniques, we're feeding now 8 billion people on the planet. My question for you is, how are we going to feed 16 billion people? Well, luckily, we had some Neolithic ancestors that figured out how to hybridize plants. The Neolithic revolution started about 10,000 years ago when well, it starts, we think, with this plant here. This is a emmer, which is a low yield wheat that was first found in Turkey, right? If you know where Turkey is, in those mountains. Now it grows naturally, right? So you're a Neolithic person, you're hunting and gathering, you see this little plant, you know there's seeds in there. You take the seeds, rub out the seeds, maybe put the seeds into a little animal skin bag, because what's great about it is you can take it later, grind it into kind of a flour and turn it into like a tortilla type thing, a pita bread, if you will. Later, you could make other kinds of bread, yeast and leaven and all that comes later. But imagine then what happens when you return year after year after year, but then you're suddenly traveling here and you come down river. Maybe you drop the seeds. I don't know. Maybe you have a religious ceremony and scatter a few. Who knows? But when you come back a little while later, that has grown bigger than it ever grew where it was found. And you're going, I think we're onto something here. It was the invention of agriculture, which we call the Neolithic what? Revolution. Important? Yes. Do you need to know it? Yeah. You can't be at the university and not know that. That's important that you know that. These are basics, man. All right, so civilization then is born in 4 places. Don't count the bottom 2. Mesoamerica, yes, they created civilization. We're talking about the Maya, for example, in Peru, the Inca, but they did not shape history. They were destroyed by more powerful civilizations that came under the Spanish at the time. So these 4, though, would all make history. And the first of these was in Mesopotamia. And 3,500 BCE, right? And I'm going to get a map here. Let's see if I can find a good map. There's all these Neolithic villages learning to grow agriculture. Here's where Immer would have been found, right here. And then down here, a little place along the coast. By the way, this is filled in with silt. So all of this right here has been filled in over the centuries. So it would have been about this spot right here. The first civilization begins. Please tell me you know the name of the very first civilization in human history. If you know it, raise your hand. Okay, give it a shot. By the way, when you give it a shot and you're wrong, that's okay. At least you're giving it a shot. What is it, do you think? Mesopotamia is the geographic region. Mesopotamia literally means what? It's Greek for what? The land between 2 rivers. Mesopotamia, middle, 2 rivers, okay? Name the 2 rivers. Tigris and Euphrates. The first civilization, though, to grow food in abundance and to create the elements of civilization, which means a city as opposed to a village, and everything that's going to go along with that. What was the name of the civilization? Yes, please.
Was it Assyria?
No, Assyria was actually much later. You're going to get Babylon before, you're going to get Akkad, you're going to get Assyrians were here. So what predated all of them and taught them all how to write language and whatever, that they would all build off of this first civilization? Okay, you have to know this. And if you're not paying attention right now, oh, I feel bad for you. Do you know?
Is it Sumer?
That's it. The ancient Sumerians. So the ancient Sumerians were the ones that figured this out first. Well done. Well done, you. That's great. What's that? Well, it was put to good use then. Absolutely. All right. So the first civilization was in Sumer. Now, here's the deal, right? These were the ones that invented the first form of writing. So you can't have history unless you have writing. Can you tell me that writing style? What is that? Yes. Cuneiform. How many actually used cuneiform? Did anybody teach you how to write it? We do in my class. It's fun, right? It's a lot of fun. It's a very logical kind of thing, isn't it, really? I only messed with the numbers in my class. I hope you got further than that. But they create pictograms, right, of different things. Anyway, it's pretty cool. But this written system was written on clay tablets. Why? Because in this particular area, here's a tablet right here that's cuneiform. It's all on mud. Why? Because there's a lot of mud. Because the whole history of civilization is the history of mud. What is the name of the country that the civilizations of Mesopotamia emerged in? What's the country that's there today? Iraq. Now, listen, my last class, you guys got it right off, but my last class, nobody knew the name of the country today. And we have fought 3 wars there in the last 20 years. And it's not Afghanistan, it's Iraq. We fought the Persian Gulf War first, then we fought the war of Iraq, we actually call it that, and then the war against ISIS in northern Iraq and Syria, right here. And people don't know where it is. And Sumer would have been down here, and these dams and everything were built later. There would have been swamps and stuff. But the thing about this area is that they're in a broad plain. And see if I can get to a picture of that. Look at all the Neolithic villages all over. Look at the China one. China, of course, creates civilization too, as we just saw. But here's what it would have looked like in ancient times. And this city right here, Eridu, was one of the early Sumerian cities. But take a look at this little picture at the bottom. This is a broad mud plain. There's no stone, very few trees. It's a desert. The only thing that keeps it alive is this mud flowing down. And why is the mud necessary? Why is the mud necessary? A little louder, please. Yeah, exactly right. They didn't have fertilizer like we do today. We use chemical fertilizers, right? Nitrogen, all that keeps plants growing. They wouldn't have had that. So this was how the soil was rejuvenated every year. If you plant Immer in the same plot year after year after year, and you don't replenish that soil, the yields are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually it's not even worth doing. Fertilizer is the key. And the fertilizer comes in the form of mud. And that means you must have a flood. And so all of these are river civilizations that flood. The Huanghe River in China floods wildly and crazily. It's just insane, but it still brings that mud and enough water to cultivate rice in those paddies that were very water intensive. Here, wheat, barley, other kinds of products were figured out. But the problem is that it's not an open plain. So you got nomadic peoples in the south, nomadic peoples in the north coming through and stealing all your stuff. So guess what? They take their little city and put a wall around it and create a warrior class. And they create so much extra food that they're able to have rulers called lugals, priest kings. There's no separation of church and state in the ancient world or in the classical world or the medieval world either. And in some places it still doesn't exist. That's a really modern concept. But in this one, the religion and the government are one and the same. The ruler, the lugal, the priest king, one and the same. These were the ones that would tell you, oh, we need a plant now. And these were the ones that structured the society. They basically said, hey, you know what we got to do? We got to control the flood. Now, it's not the way you think. They're trying not to stop the flood. They're trying to expand the flood over a larger area so they can increase yields. Now, there's a lot of history that goes on, and I can't believe that we talked in this class about Hammurabi's code, and you didn't even know what was going on in that area. To me, I feel bad. You know, next year I'm going to kind of start with this. But the agricultural surplus allowed for systematic planning that was planned and created a surplus of workers who could now do other things. So the next element of civilization is economic specialization. In other words, not everybody has to be hunting for food all the time. So while the majority are still planting crops, there is a group of people that can spend their life making mud bricks and making this temple called the Ziggurat of Ur. Pretty impressive building. Or, you know, making their own homes. Here's some cuneiform on mud tablets. Here's some beautiful things here. And anyway, it creates a class society. We're going to skip ahead now and we're going to jump to Egypt, because I think it's even easier to understand if we look at Egypt. You guys do the Epic of Gilgamesh? Raise your hand if you did it. You did it? Where?
It was Mr. C's World History.
Yeah.
We talked about it
Briefly, read it sometime. It's an epic poem, right up there with the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's just pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, I wish we had time to go through it with you. It's a lot of fun. There's a flood, by the way, like Noah's flood in it. It's pretty exciting stuff. Okay, but we're going to jump ahead. Yes, I did get the Avengers in there, and talk about Egypt. Now, Egypt also invented writing. What do we call their writing? Hieroglyphics. Very good. Excellent. So I'm going to skip these slides right here. This is all the stuff that you're missing. Okay. And let's go and here talk about Egypt. Now, Egypt is different than Mesopotamia by a lot. First of all, climate change has always been happening. The Sahara Desert used to be a great place to graze your animals and things. Not now. And as it started to become more arid, people moved in from the desert to this river, which was always there. They came actually from both sides and even from the south. And when they established little Neolithic villages called nomes, N-O-M-E-S. And there were almost 100 of them. Now, the people living in the nomes quickly realized that if the flood, now here's where Egypt's different. The flood in Egypt comes on the same day every year. And in some places, that flood is 30 feet deep. What's the name of the river? The Nile. Why does it flood on the same day every year? Why does the flood so big? What's happening that's allowing this river of water to flow through one of the driest, most arid deserts on the planet? What's happening to the south upstream? Yeah. What's causing the flood? You're to monsoons. You know that in the certain tropical regions, right? When the earth starts to change seasons, that the currents of the ocean change dramatically, put new intensity into the atmosphere in terms of rain. And all of a sudden the monsoons hit and it rains like terribly for months. All the tributaries then start to fill up. And they all converge, and the timing is uncanny, and it's literally the same day every year. There might be small variances, but not by much. So if you're a religious person here, meaning the leader of your nome, you're going to know when that's going to happen because you've already done earth sky calculations. You figured out primitive calendars. You know when it's going to happen. That gives you a lot of power. And if you can organize the work, you become a powerful person in that community. And the work is, when the flood comes, expand it as far as you can. They had two types of land in ancient Egypt, the red land and the black land. The black land grows food. The red land is sand, does not. So the idea was to extend, building dikes and diversionary things, to extend this black earth, the mud, to the widest possible area. They even had a word for it called Kemet. And they wanted the most Kemet they could possibly create because now the population is growing. Here's another thing with civilization. The population goes beyond tribes and villages. At one point, by the time we get to the Old Kingdom, we're talking about 3.5 million people. We're talking about the population of Utah. What does it take to feed that many people? And the population's growing. So you've got, oh, by the way, you're going to take hundreds and thousands of those people and you're going to put them to work building pyramids and things. See, because the gnomes had to learn to work together, because if one gnome did something that endangered another one downstream by their activities, then that's not going to go over too well. And eventually Egypt unites, whether by war or by just natural, negotiation, into two kingdoms, the upper kingdom and the lower kingdom. Those two kingdoms were once united then by a mythical pharaoh by the name of Menes, which is 3100 BC. They had already developed civilization. They already had their writing style. All of that came together before the kingdoms were created. And the famous crowns now, one crown for the northern kingdom, another one for the southern kingdom, are united under Menes. And then they start their great periodization. Egyptian history falls into 1, 2, 3, 4 periods of periodization, right? The Old Kingdom, then there was a period of disruption called the Intermediate Period. The Middle Kingdom, then another invasion from the Hyksos, which they had to deal with. The New Kingdom, which is the most glorious period of building, and the Late Period. But this structure right here, the tallest building ever built in the world until the Eiffel Tower in modern times, this Pyramid of Cheops, was built in the Old Kingdom. Literally hundreds of thousands of people working tirelessly to carve out limestone blocks, to stack them, to drag them up here. By the way, they did it with basically no pulleys, no cranes. They built these long sand ramps and would pull these up in position. But when they got the core of the pyramid built, inside of it, they had a temple complex, if you want to call it that, a burial tomb for the person they were building this pyramid for. They were hiding this person's mummy based upon their mythology, religion, if you will, and they were protecting it for all time. And then they did a miraculous thing. They found the highest grade limestone that they could, one that could be polished, and they used the highest quality on the outside layer, fitting it so tight together that it's just astounding. You can see bits and pieces here of what it used to look like, and then they polished it. So from a distance, it would be as bright as a field of snow. It'd be like looking at Timpanogos when the sun comes out and it hits that snow mass at top. You could see this pyramid as far as the eye could see. They even put a gold top on part of it so it would catch the sun, because sun god was a big thing for them. You can imagine the splendor and the awe of it all. And you're talking building this 4,500 years ago? This is the temple complex, the one that's so famous near Giza. Then we get the Pyramid of the Kings phase, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. This is Howard Carter, who finds King Tut. You certainly covered that, right? Somebody covered King Tut? All right, now, look, the thing is, the building just kept going and going and going. And Egypt also had access to gold mines. So they had more gold than anybody in the ancient world. I mean, it was just insane how much gold they were able to produce. Hard, laborious work, but they got this gold. And if you look, for example, at the death mask of a minor pharaoh, King Tut, they would bury fortunes of gold with each pharaoh. Anyway, but then what happened is through history, we kind of lost contact with hieroglyphics. It got to the point where nobody could read it. The French army invaded during the age of Napoleon, and they found this stone in a little town called Rosetta. Now, the British came and kicked them out, and they grabbed the stone, so it's now in the British Museum. But a French scholar by the name of Jean-Francois Champollion looked at the two languages he understood. One he understood was Greek. Another one was demonic. He learned demonic, and then he kind of started comparing, realized that what he was looking at was a hieroglyphic transcript of the exact same message, basically some new rules as to how we're going to handle our temple donations. And he broke the code, so we can now read hieroglyphics, which is pretty amazing stuff. Now, civilization would grow and expand and start to then encroach upon the Aboriginal world. As the ideas of civilization spread throughout the Mediterranean, spread throughout China, spread throughout India, whatever, civilization is growing constantly. Right. But at the expense of Aboriginal people. So if we go back here, we see that this continues to today. In Brazil, for example, is probably the most important case right now. These are Aboriginal areas that still exist with different groups living the traditional lifestyle, if you will. But they're being pushed out of those areas systematically by who? People, first of all, cutting all of the wood, cutting all the trees, burning all the excess for agriculture. Brazil soon will be the #1 producer of surplus food in the world. Right now, that's the United States. Now, we did the same thing. We pushed the Native American completely off the continent, left their numbers to a fragile 250,000 at one point in the lower 48 states, and took all their land, and guess what? We planted crops on it, or started to run our cattle, or whatever it happened to be. That's what's happening here. But this comes at a price. What happens if we continue to cut that rainforest down? Yes.
It turns into a desert.
It's going to get drier. And then also what's going to happen is what? Do you know how much oxygen is created here? Do you know how much water that goes in the ocean comes through here first? Do you realize that the entire ecology of the planet is driven in large part by the Brazilian rainforest? And we're taking it apart so we can plant soybeans. There's even American farmers who have bought land down there who, farm in both continents. large-scale agriculture. What we've done to the Native Americans, this traditional lifestyle, is wiped it off the face of the earth. Here's what's left of the Native American dominance of the whole continent, completely forced out, right, on the East Coast by people like Andrew Jackson. You guys remember the Cherokee Trail of Tears. The story of the Navajo and how they were treated is the same story as the Cherokee. It was a horrible story if you've ever read it, the Navajo Trail of Tears. But the biggest reservation here is the Navajo Reservation. And we've just literally given them little postage stamp places to live on, like the Shivwits Indian Reservation just down by my home in St. George. Did I tell you the story about how I did my run over the weekend? 2.5 miles from my house, going up this track. It's Bureau of Land Management. It's a monument that has been preserved because there's petroglyphs all along the cliffs, and they're really cool looking. And then I'm doing my run and I see this little sign. So I go run over there and run it. It is a Neolithic, 800 years old, so it predates Columbus, where a small group of Southern Paiutes who grow their food down the cliff in the Santa Clara River, and then they bring that food up and hide it up on this hilltop. And they created these, storage areas, right? Dry storage. They dug the holes, then they covered them with stones, then they plastered it in, covered it over so the insects couldn't eat it all. And it's kind of on a little rise, so when it rains, it kind of flows around it so that it doesn't get wet. And when they get raided by a group of Shoshone that want to capture them and their children and to take them into slavery and sell them in California, which happened, they were able to hide, run, and whatever, and yet their food wasn't stolen. It's quite a sight. It's a real treasure, and it's just a pleasure to live next to it. And this is kind of the problem, because we have a story here in America where we're trying to decide whether or not we're going to preserve all this stuff or not. The first conservation president was probably Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a naturalist. He was a biologist, zoologist. He basically figured out all of the plants that lived near his home in Virginia and recorded them all and whatever. He had a lot of time on his hands because he had 200 slaves doing all of his work, building his house and all this kind of stuff. So he just kind of wandered around playing scientist. But he sent an expedition when he purchased Louisiana from the French. And what was the name of that expedition? And you know what it was? It was a scientific expedition. Record every new animal you see, every bird, every duck, every fish. Oh, nobody in the East had seen buffalo yet. Send samples back to me. I'm going to stuff them and put them in my home in Monticello. I'm going to turn the whole dome of Monticello into a natural history museum. And he would bring people in and he'd show them, hey, Lewis and Clark found this and here's where they were. Look at the pictures that they drew of this tribe and that tribe. Of course, they get the help of Sacagawea and all that. You know the whole story. But we go about 100 years. Nobody cared about the natural world for much until we get to this guy. And this guy's Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was an interesting kid because as a kid, he had lots of emotional problems. Trust me. He had anger management issues like, oh my goodness. But he moved out to Montana on a ranch. He came from a very wealthy family, so he could buy a ranch. But he moves out there and he transforms himself from a skinny kid into an adventurer, if you will. And he was big upon preserving the West. Now, everything in the East had already been brought up in private hands, but the West, oh, there was a lot of land still. And so they started to set big chunks of it aside as national parks. How many have ever been to Yosemite National Park? Right? It's brilliant, right? This class, last class, like nobody had heard of Yosemite. It's California, right? Redwoods, seen redwoods too? Isn't that amazing? These are great places. Here is Roosevelt visiting Yosemite National Park. And the picture's interesting because they took a picture like this, right? And then they put it on a card and you go through a viewer and look three-dimensional. It's kind of sweet, right? Then here he is visiting the Grand Canyon. How many have been to the Grand Canyon? See, I love this class. You guys have been some places. Got to see the Grand Canyon. If you haven't seen the Grand Canyon, oh my gosh, right? It's just pretty sweet. And then he gets passed through Congress, the Antiquities Act of 1906. Now you're going to need to know this because the Antiquities Act of 1906 is a very, very important act. Basically what it says, starting with Roosevelt, Every president from this point on has done this pretty much. I don't know many that have not done this. It gives the president the ability to, quote, declare by public proclamation, in other words, presidential order, historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic or scientific interest that are situated on land owned and controlled by the federal government to be national monuments. And let's see, this is immediately Gavin. Is this Gavin? Come on, Gavin. You got to go see Mr. Runyon. Okay. Probably for a test thing or whatever, right? So here you go. Yeah, no worries. All right. So you see what happens here? The whole west of the United States now has this big agency called the Interior Department. Now, the Interior Department, right? Well, I don't know. Over through a lot of history, it's been controlled by cattle ranchers and oil producers, okay, who want to take the lands of the West and get leases to extract mining, natural resources, oil, natural gas, copper mines, all this kind of stuff. The land, most of it is controlled by this group called the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM. You need to know that. BLM, under the Department of the Interior. Also is the Forest Service. How many have been to a forest lately? Yeah, if you walk 25 feet out of your house that way toward the mountains, you're in a forest. Okay, you can't miss forests in Utah. National forest, look for the signs. And then there's these national parks, which are truly special, right? Now, we have a bunch of national parks in Utah. Let's name some, because they're truly special. Name one.
Arches.
How many have been to Arches? I love Arches. Don't you love Arches? Go to that one canyon area. You can get lost forever, right? It's pretty cool. That's where Indiana Jones was filmed, all that. Never mind. Love Arches. Give me another one. Yes. Canyonlands is special. Who's been to Canyonlands? Now it's a little more remote. So yeah, well done. Give me another one. Yes.
Bryce.
Bryce that's beautiful, isn't it? It's breathtaking.
Yeah.
It's high in the air. It's cold up there, right? But it's a special place. Who's been to Bryce? Really, this class it's the other class. I have one or two. Maybe they were all asleep. Give me another one. Zion's, the most visited park in America, other than maybe Yosemite. It's been insane. During COVID, that place just packed in because it's outside, right? And people coming up from California, Nevada, all Arizona, everywhere. Zion's is a core part of the economy of St. George because of the tourism. All right, give me some more. Yeah.
Is it Coral Reefs?
Coral Reefs. You seen that one? Yeah. Got another one? Yellowstone's, of course, in Wyoming, right? And Idaho and Montana. How many have been to Yellowstone? It's truly special, right? Yellowstone is special. Well, they all are, really. How many have been to Bears Ears? Good for you, too. What did you think? Yeah, this would have been before it, or just as it was made a monument then. And then you've been there recently. What did you think of it?
It was all right.
It's remote, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still
I
really
just
remote.
drove, like, in the area and saw it, but,
Yeah,
like, actually
yeah.
we hiked it.
Well, guess what? It just got made a national monument again. Here's what happened. When President Trump becomes president, he decides that anything Obama did has got to go away. In fact, Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument 2 was by Bill Clinton, and it was down here in the same region, down near Moab, follow the river down. Lake Powell is a national recreation area. It's also under the Labor Department. I haven't been to Lake Powell. Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Hope there's enough water to keep the lake out. But anyway, this Escalante Grand Staircase, one of the most beautiful drives you'll ever make. When Trump becomes president, by presidential order, he undoes these monuments. He cuts this one down to size, makes it much smaller. And then he takes this and makes just a postage stamp of what it was. He takes another one off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean because some of them are underwater. The biggest one in America is off the coast of Hawaii that George W. Bush set aside because we got to protect the coral and we got to protect the reef areas and all that kind of in Hawaii. But at any rate, this right here was Bears Ears. Now, if you're down here and you're a cattle rancher, you hate Bears Ears because it means you can't do your BLM stuff. That means run your cattle on it anymore. Yeah. And if you're an oil producer, you can't get a lease to drill for natural gas or oil down there anymore. Okay. if you're a miner, you can't go down there and mine for uranium anymore. This was the source of much of our uranium for the Cold War. And so those businesses, those industries have been fighting this. They're going up against what we call conservation groups, like the Sierra Club and whatever, that's saying, look, the future of Southern Utah is not going to be in oil and gas exploration. By the way, once you drill that well, does it leave a mess behind? This takes forever to clean up. And by the way, those cattle, oh, come on, if you're going to raise cattle, go to Nebraska. Go where you got some grass. Go where you got some water. Go where you got this land is just, sagebrush. Come on. So it's one of those fights between the rural areas of the agricultural, miners and also of the cattle ranchers fighting against the conservationists. So when Trump got rid of this, the purpose was to allow oil and gas drilling, and his Secretary of Interior gave leases for this, some 108 leases in this region. Okay, so Biden becomes president and he undoes the orders of Trump. Last week, President Biden came out, gave a little Rose Garden speech, and he's restored Bears Ears and Escalante back to its Obama-Clinton size, restores another one that Trump had taken, by the one in the ocean, gas, oil drilling, right, was the reason for that one. And here's what he said. So let's listen to our president.
We shall surely be signing a proclamation to fully restore the boundaries of Bears Ears.
Now, he also picked the first Native American as the head of the Interior Department. She's Native American and she's a woman, the first time either of those have occupied this position. Native Americans want this because we're basically driving our ATVs over burial grounds and sacred places. So if you got antiquities, you want to preserve them, and this act, that's what it's for. And she got him to do this. Now, obviously, there's a lot of politics in Utah, rural politicians that don't want this. Utah has been fighting this, that, wait a minute, pretty soon half the state's going to be national parks and monuments. My own personal opinion is this, and I'll give you my personal opinion. I think the future of Utah is in tourism. That the rest of this is short-term and temporary, maybe lasts another decade or 2 or 3, but I've seen the tourists and they make an economy thrive. They bring a lot of money. So we'll see what happens here. I could be wrong. It might be better if we just let them continue to raise cattle out there, but let's go ahead and see what the president said.
Second, I'm restoring Utah's Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, a place of unique and extraordinary geology as well as biodiversity. Established as a national monument 25 years ago this month. Over the last quarter century, this land has produced a significant scientific discoveries per acre than more than any other national monument, everything from fossils to ancient indigenous artifacts.
The reason is because it hadn't been picked over. It's harder to get to. And so they were able, a lot of it was still preserved. A lot of the other stuff, like there's what people have been raiding those sites forever. And they sell these antiquities on antiquities markets. So it's real important to get these preserved, get some university students down there, finding it all and preserving it.
Once again, the last administration cut the size of the monument nearly in half, stripping away more than 800,000 protected acres. Today, I'm signing a proclamation to restore it to its full glory. Third, off the coast of New England, I'm restoring protection of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. Waters teeming with life, with underwater canyons as deep as parts of the Grand Canyon and underwater mountains as tall as the Appalachians. There's nothing like it in the world. Because its unique biodiversity, marine sciences, as scientists believe that this is the key to understanding life under the sea. President Obama established as a national monument 5 years ago, recognizing its irreplaceable value. Again, my predecessor chipped away at its protections.
He was basically going to allow oil drilling offshore. And if you saw what just happened in California along the Newport Beach coast, where I'm from, wow. Yeah, you don't want that for the long term.
Declaration I'll be signing today is going to restore protections established by President Obama when this monument was first created. Excuse me. The protection of public lands must not become, I should say, a pendulum that swings back and forth depending on who's in public office.
So let me ask you a question. So President Trump gets the Republican nomination, runs for president, wins again. What happens to these proclamations?
He's gonna undo all.
He's going to undo all of them again. And you look, there needs to be oil and gas exploration. We need to provide for that. We can't just lock everything up. But if it has true value for the long-term tourism and also to preserve the Neolithic world, and the ancestors of Native American tribes, I think it's kind of important to do that. But we should also have a balance, shouldn't we? I'm thinking, of course, I could be totally wrong, given climate change and everything else. Who knows? But listen to this.
It's not a partisan issue.
Oh, but it is.
I want to thank the members of Congress who have come together to support this important conservation work. And by the way, I might add, as a matter of courtesy, I spoke with both the senators from Utah. They didn't agree with what I was doing, but they were gracious, polite about it, and I appreciate that as well.
He talked to who? Senators who? Lee and Romney. And you can't be a politician in Utah and be for expanding the national park system. Because the rural vote in Utah, you urban people, you want to go there on vacation. But if you're living down there, it means new rules and restrictions. You can't take your ATV anywhere you want. If you have cattle, there's going to be limits on your grazing rights and all this stuff. So it is a rural urban divide. Wait a minute. Do we see that in the ancient world? Do we see civilization at war with the rural communities? With the people who are hunting and gathering? Yeah. It's been a 4,000 long year battle between people that live in cities opposed to people that live in the country and how they think about things differently. And so what I need you to do tomorrow, though, is to accept a challenge, right? The challenge is this. And oh, by the way, do we have time for this? Yes, barely. You guys know the difference between the Acropolis and the Parthenon? Okay. All right. The Acropolis is the hilltop in Athens where they would build defenses in early days, and then where they built their temples in latter days. On top of the Acropolis is the Parthenon, and that's this beautiful building here, restored by Pericles. Okay, just need to throw that in there in case you missed it. But now here's your assignment for tomorrow. Along this hilltop in the Acropolis were these wandering people like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, who got people talking about different things. And one of the questions Plato asked, he says, what is the best form of government? Now let's throw some out there, because I want you to think about overnight, pick one and defend it as being the best form of government. Give me some examples. What is it? Dictatorship. Good one. Give me another one. Democracy. Give me another one. Theocracy. Good. Give me another one. Autocracy. Monarchy. Which one? Anarchy. No, that would count. That's a later thing, but it's part of one. I'll take it. And I'd love to see you defend it, by the way. That'd be great fun. No, do for fun. This is for fun. Pick a different one. You guys are missing autocracy, right? What's another one? Did you say it? Okay. Oligarchy and aristocracy. All right. You willing to kind of pick one and defend it? Like anarchy's yours. Defend it as the best form of government. See what you can do with it. So tomorrow, come ready to do Socratic method on what is the best form of government. All right, we'll stop right there. We'll end the share. Gavin, welcome back. What was it?
I just signed up for cocktails.
Oh, cool. All right.
Kevin, are you ready?